The night is quiet, except for the faint breath of the wind moving over sand and stone. I sit by a small fire that cracks softly, throwing out its red light in slow, pulsing rhythms, like the heartbeat of something ancient. Above me, the sky is deep and endless. Not black, but full of quiet movement, 1,000 distant fires of its own. When I lift my face to it, I feel as though I am being watched by time itself. This is how the old stories begin, not with grand declarations or kings and battles, but with silence, with someone sitting near warmth, waiting for the right moment to speak. The first storytellers, I think, might have felt exactly this. The stillness before a tale, the breath that holds both memory and mystery. And so tonight, as the world hums faintly in the distance, I invite you to sit here with me, not as a stranger, but as someone returning to an old circle of listening. The land around us, though unseen in the dark, is wide and full of history. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the bones of rivers sleep beneath the dust. Farther still, the roots of old trees hold on to stories told before any of us were born. I can almost hear them when the wind passes through. The soft rush that sounds less like air and more like whispering voices. They say the earth remembers everything. Every footstep, every song, every dream laid down upon it. Perhaps that is why, when we listen closely, we can still sense what once was, the rhythm of lives that move gently, with respect for the soil beneath them and the stars above. Before there were borders and maps, before the names of nations and empires, there were people who looked at the same night sky and wondered the same things we do now. Who made all this? Why are we here? What does it mean to belong? Close your eyes for a moment. Can you hear the fire crackle? Can you feel the wind brush against your cheek? It's the same wind that touched the faces of those who once walked barefoot across this desert plain, carrying baskets of maize, singing to the morning sun. The same stars guided their journeys, marked their seasons, and watched their children sleep. Time has changed much. Our cities rise, our languages shift. Yet the sky remains patient, holding all our stories together like a vast woven blanket. When I think about history, I often picture it as a book, heavy, bound, full of dates and figures. But these stories, they are different. They were not written with ink. They were carried in breath and song, passed from mother to daughter, elder to child. They were shaped by hands that worked clay, painted hides, carved symbols into canyon walls. Every mark meant something. A memory, a promise, a reminder that the world is alive. Tonight, I want to bring those stories close again. Not to analyze them, not to prove or disprove, but to listen. To remember that history isn't only what happened. It's what was felt, believed, and lived. It's the echo of laughter carried by the wind, the hush of prayer spoken into dawn. These are not stories of strangers. They are the voices of our distant kin, people who, like us, loved, feared, dreamed, and sought meaning in the turning of the stars. I imagine a woman long ago sitting as I do now. She cradles her child and hums a low melody. The fire before her glows blue at the edges, fed by dry sagebrush. Around her, others gather quietly, their shadows long against the sand. She begins to speak, softly at first, as if speaking to the night itself. Her voice carries the first lines of a creation story, one she has heard since childhood. The listeners close their eyes not to sleep, but to see. That is how memory works here, through listening, through stillness. There are no written pages, no gilded temples, no marble statues, only voice and heart. And because of that, every retelling is alive, breathing with the storyteller's own soul. Perhaps that is why these legends endure. Not because they were written down, but because they were felt too deeply to vanish. The fire pops suddenly, sending a few sparks drifting upward like tiny stars returning home. I watch them fade and think of how fragile light is, and yet how endlessly it returns. These sparks remind me of generations, each one bright for a moment, then gone, but leaving warmth behind. The land itself becomes a kind of memory keeper, storing the heat, the echoes, the dust of all who came before. You and I, in our own ways, are part of that same continuum. When we look up at the sky tonight, We are not separate from the ancestors who once traced constellations with their stories. They believed the stars were living beings, guides, guardians, sometimes tricksters. They looked at the same patterns we call Orion or the Pleiades and saw instead the Great Bear, the Spider-Woman, or the trail of a hero's journey. Their cosmos was not distant or cold. It was a living map of meaning. Sometimes I wonder what they would think of us now. Our glowing screens, our restless noise, our hurry to name and measure everything. Would they smile kindly, knowing that beneath all our technology, we still ache for wonder? That deep down, we still need the comfort of story? Maybe that's why you're here tonight. Not just to learn, but to feel connected again. There's a quiet kind of healing that comes with listening. In a world that demands constant answers, the old legends offer something gentler. Questions that breathe. They remind us that mystery is not an absence of truth. It's the space where truth grows. When the elders told stories, they were not trying to entertain. They were keeping the world in balance. Each tale was a thread in the great weaving of life, meant to remind the people that everything, the rivers, the stones, the clouds, has a spirit worth honoring. So tonight, as you listen, let the edges of your day soften. Let the noise of thought drift away. Imagine yourself beside this same fire, wrapped in its flickering warmth, the smell of smoke sweet and earthy. Around us, unseen lives stir. Crickets, the faint hoot of an owl, the soft rhythm of your own breath. We are not alone here. We never were. The old ones would say that every time a story is told, a piece of the world is healed. Maybe that's why these tales still find their way to us, even after centuries. They arrive quietly, like rain returning to thirsty ground, carrying remembrance in every drop. I look up once more at the vastness above, and it seems to breathe back. The stars are steady, unblinking, patient. They have seen everything, joy and sorrow, love and loss, and they keep shining, as if to say, all things pass, but the light remains. And so, this is my invitation to you, not just to listen, but to remember. Remember that the earth beneath your feet has heard 1,000 stories before yours. Remember that somewhere in your own heart lives an ancestor who once sat by this same kind of fire, tracing constellations with wonder. If this story touches your heart, share your thoughts below. Every voice adds to this circle. The night is long, and there are many more stories to tell. But for now, just breathe. Look up. We are still here, under the same stars. Before there was a world as we know it, before the mountains had names, before the sun had its path, there was only sky, water, and the soft hum of possibility. That is where many of our oldest stories begin, in the in-between, in the hush before form took shape. When I close my eyes, I imagine that stillness, an endless stretch of shimmering air, so quiet you could almost hear light being born. The elders would say that even in nothingness, there was presence, a heartbeat, a breath waiting to become sound. And when the first sound came, it was not thunder or command, but a gentle fall, the descent of a woman from the heavens. They called her Sky Woman. She lived in a realm above the clouds, where harmony and order reigned. But one day, curiosity stirred within her. A pull, gentle but insistent, that drew her toward a hole in the floor of her sky world. When she peered through, she saw a vast darkness below, a deep expanse of water with no land in sight. Some say she slipped, others say she jumped, but however it happened, she began to fall down through endless blue. Below her, the water creatures stirred. The geese looked up and saw her descending, light streaming around her like the dawn itself. They rose quickly to meet her, wings outstretched, breaking her fall. She floated among them for a time, safe but weightless. Yet she needed ground, something to stand upon. And so the great turtle offered his shell. The muskrat, small but determined, dove deep beneath the waters to retrieve a handful of earth. Many had tried before him, the beaver, the loon, the otter, all failing, all returning breathless. But Muskrat, though weak and trembling, returned with a tiny clump of soil clutched in his paw. He died, but his sacrifice gave birth to the land. Sky Woman spread the soil across the turtle's back, and it grew. spreading and rising until it became the earth itself. That, they say, is why North America is called Turtle Island, because the land still rests on the back of the ancient turtle who held her up. And Sky Woman, in gratitude, began to plant the seeds she had brought with her from the sky world: corn, beans, squash. The three sisters that would feed generations. When I think of this story, I imagine not just a myth, but a memory. A way of saying that the world was born from cooperation, not conquest. That even the smallest life, a muskrat, a seed, holds power beyond measure. In this story, creation is not an act of domination. It's an act of care. And maybe that's the difference between the old myths and the ones we tell today. Ours are full of explosions, battles, and beginnings forged from destruction. There's begin with a fall and a rescue, a partnership between sky and water, between fragility and strength. It makes me wonder, when you think of where we come from, which story feels more true to your heart? The one of soil or sky or spirit? The Hopi people tell it differently. Their story begins not in the sky, but beneath the earth, in the dim glow of the underworld. They say the first people lived deep below, in chambers of quiet light. Life there was peaceful but also stagnant, nothing ever changed. The air grew thick with longing. One day, a voice came through the earth above, the voice of the Creator, calling them upward. The people were told to climb toward the world above through a small opening, using a tall reed as their path. One by one they climbed, emerging from darkness into light. When they reached the surface, they found themselves in a vast, wild land. The air was fresh, the colors new. The sun rose for the first time, and the people wept at its beauty. They learned that they had to move carefully, to live in balance with what they found. Every plant, every animal was their sibling. The corn was not just food, it was a teacher showing how to grow by giving. The wind was not just a breeze, it was the breath of the world. I like to imagine that moment of first emergence, the blinding brightness after long shadow, the feel of warm soil beneath their fingers. It's easy to see it as metaphor, yes, but perhaps it's also an inner truth, that each of us must, in some way, climb from our own underworlds into understanding. The Hopi story reminds us that creation is not just an event long ago. It's a journey we each repeat, again and again, every time we rise from despair into light. Somewhere far to the north, another story took shape, the sacred tale of the white buffalo calf woman, told by the Lakota. The people, long ago, were hungry and divided. The buffalo had vanished, and their hearts grew heavy with conflict. One day, 2 scouts were sent to search the plains for food. As they traveled, they saw a figure approaching, a woman dressed in pure white buckskin, carrying a bundle in her arms. One scout, filled with greed, reached for her. Instantly, a white mist surrounded him, and when it cleared, only bones remained. The other scout fell to his knees, understanding her sacred power. The woman told him to return to his people and prepare a lodge for her coming. When she arrived, she taught them the sacred ways, how to pray, how to live with respect for the earth, how to see spirit in all things. From her bundle, she revealed the first chinunpa, the sacred pipe, a symbol of connection between the people and the Creator. When her teachings were done, she rolled upon the earth and transformed into a white buffalo calf, walking away into the horizon. To this day, her promise remains, that one day she will return, bringing balance once more when the world forgets its harmony. Each of these stories, from the sky, from the soil, from the sacred plains, carries its own rhythm, but their heartbeat is the same. They all begin with relationship, between water and sky, darkness and light, human and spirit. Creation is not something done to the world, it's something done with it. When I listen to these myths, I hear not superstition but wisdom. They remind us that life itself is a circle, everything connected, everything dependent. The turtle, the reed, the buffalo, all parts of the same whole. Modern minds often speak of creation as a formula, a moment of chemistry and chance. But the old stories ask something gentler. What if creation is still happening? Every time we plant a seed, mend a wound, or forgive. What if we are all still shaping the world together, just as Sky Woman did, one handful of earth at a time? As I sit by the fire now, I think about the muskrat's courage, the Hopi's climb, the white buffalo calf woman's gift, and I see in them not just origin tales, but ways of living. Humility, gratitude, responsibility. Perhaps the ancients were not explaining the past, but teaching how to remain human in the present. The flames sway low, and the desert wind hums softly through the sage. I lift my gaze to the horizon, and it seems almost to glow. Maybe, in some quiet way, creation never stopped. Maybe the stars above us are still forming stories, and maybe we, simply by listening, help them take shape. As you listen, what version of creation speaks most to you, the one of soil, sky, or spirit? Share your reflection when the story ends. Your answer becomes part of this ancient dialogue. Morning arrives softly here. There is no clock to command it, no alarm, no hum of machines. The day begins when the first strands of light find their way through the cracks of the lodge wall, painting slow gold lines across the floor. I rise to the sound of wind brushing through reeds outside, the whisper of something older than words. The air smells of earth and smoke, of cedar bark still damp from the night's mist. Our village sits near the bend of a river that never stops speaking. It murmurs over stones, carries stories downstream, and brings back whispers from faraway lands. The scent of pine from the north, the salt of the sea from the south. The elders say that the river connects us to everyone. If we listen closely, we can hear other villages breathing through its current. Sometimes I think the water knows us better than we know ourselves. The mornings are filled with quiet motion. Smoke rises from many fires, each one its own heartbeat. Women move gracefully between them, tending pots, grinding maize, kneading dough from crushed acorns or cornmeal. Their hands are strong yet patient, hands that have known birth, harvest, and loss, and still find rhythm in small daily miracles. I often sit beside my grandmother as she grinds corn on the stone metate. The rhythmic scrape of stone against grain becomes a song of its own, slow, steady, ancient. She never rushes it. The corn listens, she says. It remembers how you treat it. Nearby, the men prepare for the day's hunt. I can hear the tightening of bowstrings, the low talk of strategy, the soft laughter that comes before long hours apart. They move with a kind of quiet dignity, their leather moccasins barely making a sound. Before they leave, they pause by the fire, whispering a few words to the flame. It is a prayer not for victory, but for balance, that what is taken will be replaced, that no creature's spirit will be lost in vain. When the hunters disappear into the forest's edge, the village settles into its gentle rhythm. Children run freely between lodges, chasing each other through dust that glows in shafts of morning light. Their laughter rises above the low hum of work, the sound of weaving looms, the rustle of hides being stretched, the clatter of pottery taking shape. There is no separation between labor and life here. Both are part of the same breath. I often walk down to the riverbank at midday. The sunlight makes the water shimmer like glass. Women gather there to wash clothing and speak softly among themselves. Their talk drifts between memories and dreams. What the clouds look like today, what the next season might bring. The air fills with the scent of sage, which we burn as a gift to the spirits. Its smoke curls upward, thin and white, and I always imagine it carrying our words to those who came before us. Our homes are round, built from wood and clay, covered with bark or thatch. They smell of smoke and herbs, of warmth and memory. Inside, the walls are lined with tools made from stone and bone, their surfaces smooth from years of use. Every object tells a story. A cooking pot is not just clay. It is the handprint of its maker, the patience of the fire that hardened it. A woven blanket carries the memory of every dawn it was worked beneath. The elders say that everything around us speaks. The wind, the trees, the stones beneath our feet. But you have to listen differently to hear it. I used to ask my grandfather what the wind was saying. He would close his eyes, tilt his head slightly, and say, "It depends on what you need to hear." Then he would smile, for he knew that the wind never gives the same answer twice. In the evenings, the hunters return. Sometimes they bring deer, sometimes only stories. They kneel beside the fire and lay down their offerings. A feather, a bit of fur, a song. The women begin to cook, stirring stews thick with root vegetables and wild herbs. The smell is deep and comforting, like the embrace of night itself. Children fall asleep to the crackle of flames and the murmur of elders telling tales of the old ones. The great migrations, the spirit animals, the dreams that became rivers. Trade routes thread our lives together like invisible lines. We exchange salt for obsidian, shells for flint, songs for stories. Traders arrive on foot or by canoe, their presence like a small festival. They bring news of storms in the east, of new families settling near the mountains, of strange visitors beyond the horizon. When they speak, the whole village listens. We are small, but we belong to something vast. Kinship is our law, though it is not written. We live by the memory of obligation to give, to care, to share. Each child belongs not only to their parents, but to the whole community. If one suffers, all feel it. If one prospers, all are lifted. The council meets beneath the great tree to settle matters, but rarely do they raise their voices. Patience is a virtue here, and silence often says more than speech. I remember a night when thunder rolled over the hills. The children were frightened, hiding under blankets. The oldest woman among us walked into the rain, lifted her hands, and laughed. "It is only the sky speaking to the earth," she said. "They have been apart too long." She danced in the downpour until everyone was laughing too. I learned then that even fear can turn to joy when met with understanding. The seasons move in circles. In spring we plant, in summer we gather, in autumn we dry and store, in winter we tell stories. Each part has its beauty, its necessity. There is no rush, no sense of falling behind. The world teaches its own pace. Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to live as the rivers do. Never hurrying, never stopping, just moving with purpose. The tools we use are made from what the land gives. Flint, sinew, bone, wood. They are humble yet precise. A single arrowhead can take hours to shape, each chip deliberate. The work itself becomes a kind of meditation. The hands learn patience. The mind learns quiet. I think of how different this is from the noise of the world that would come later, the clang of metal, the rush of engines. Here, creation is never rushed. At night, the village glows with 100 small fires. The wind carries their smoke upward, mixing with the scent of pine resin and roasted corn. If you listen closely, you can hear singing soft, layered, like waves upon a shore. Some songs are for the spirits of the hunt, others for the children sleeping, others for gratitude. I like the lullabies best, those meant to cradle the mind between waking and dream. They say that when we sleep, our souls travel along the wind to visit our ancestors. Perhaps that's why the night feels so full, not of ghosts, but of love. I once asked my grandmother how people remembered so much without writing anything down. She smiled and tapped her chest. "We write here," she said. "Every kindness, every story, every promise. When you forget something good, the wind reminds you." There's a certain peace in that, knowing that memory is a shared act between human and world. The land keeps what we cannot. The scent of cedar after rain, the curve of a mountain, the taste of snow on your tongue. All of it part of a language older than speech. The wind carries those words across time, whispering them into new ears. Imagine waking to the scent of rain on cedar bark. Would you trade that peace for the rush of modern life? Tell me below. I'd love to know. The fire has burned low tonight. Its glow moves softly across the sand, and the shadows of the surrounding rocks seem alive. Long, shifting shapes that look almost like creatures listening from the edge of the dark. Nights like this were made for stories about them, the old companions who have walked beside us since the first dawn. Long before people thought of themselves as separate from nature, they believed the animals carried pieces of the human heart. Every feather, every paw print, every howl under the moon held a lesson waiting to be understood. When a hunter dreamed of a fox, it was not mere fancy. It was counsel. When a woman saw a raven land before her path, she looked for meaning in its wings. To live then was to live in conversation with all living things. Of all the voices in those stories, Coyote is the loudest, clever, mischievous, and endlessly restless. The elders say that Coyote once stole fire from the mountain spirits so the people would not freeze. He tricked the guardians by pretending to limp, hiding a spark in his tail as he ran. Because of that, his tail still glows faintly red in the sunset. But Coyote is not simply a hero. He is also pride, impatience, appetite, the part of us that wants more than we need. There is a tale where Coyote tries to shape the world to his liking. He decides that rivers should run uphill, that day should last forever. At first he laughs at his success, until the fish cannot swim, the plants wither, and even the stars seem confused. Only then does he see the cost of his cleverness. Ashamed, he lays down his tail and prays for balance. The world slowly rights itself. When I hear that story, I think of the times I've done the same. Change something good simply because I could, mistaking control for wisdom. Coyote lives in each of us. The restless mind that questions rules, the daring heart that sometimes forgets humility. Yet without him, the fire would never have come down the mountain. Creation, it seems, needs its tricksters. If Coyote is the restless spark, then Raven is the watchful shadow. In the cold north, the people tell that once the world lay in darkness, and Raven, seeing the people stumble, decided to bring them light. He flew to the home of the great chief, where the sun was kept hidden in a cedar box. Turning himself into a single pine needle, he drifted into the chief's daughter's water bowl and was swallowed, reborn as her child. When the boy grew, he begged to see the precious light. The chief relented, and at that moment Raven changed back into his true form, seized the glowing orb, and flew through the smoke hole, scattering sunlight across the sky. From then on, the world had day and night, and Raven's feathers were blackened by the fire he carried. The people say that is why he shines with a purple sheen, because light still lives within his darkness. Raven is clever, yes, but he is also a protector. He teaches that knowledge and trickery can serve kindness, that the world sometimes needs deception in the service of truth. When I see a raven perched on a telephone wire today, watching cars pass, I imagine he must find our machines amusing. He has seen many versions of us, builders, destroyers, storytellers, and he keeps learning. Then there is Turtle, slow and steady, the keeper of patience. In many tribes, she carries the world upon her back, not as burden, but as devotion. Her story begins when the waters rose and swallowed everything. The animals struggled, searching for land. It was Turtle who dove beneath the chaos, held her breath longer than any other, and brought up mud from the deep. From that mud, the new earth grew. She teaches endurance, the quiet power of persistence. There is another story where Turtle races Coyote. Everyone laughs when the challenge is made. Surely the slow one will lose. But Turtle does not run alone. She asks her sisters to hide along the path, each calling out when Coyote nears, "I'm already here." Exhausted and confused, Coyote collapses while Turtle reaches the end, calm and smiling. The people tell this not only to teach cunning, but to remind us that cooperation outlasts pride. When I was young, I thought these tales were just entertainment, animal fables to fill the dark. But now I hear them differently. Each is a mirror held to our own hearts. Coyote's arrogance, Raven's curiosity, Turtle's steadiness. Aren't those the very forces still shaping us today? In moments of haste, Coyote whispers, "Run faster, take more, prove yourself." In moments of fear, Raven says, "Look closer, there's another way." And when everything feels heavy and impossible, Turtle hums, "Slow down. Keep going. You'll make it." The wind moves through the canyon as if agreeing. I watch sparks lift from the fire, swirling upward until they disappear into the dark. Perhaps they become stars, or perhaps they become eyes. Those of the old spirits, still watching, still amused by how seriously we take ourselves. Our ancestors saw no sharp line between animal and human. The wolf was not merely predator. It was family, teacher, ally. The bear represented courage, but also introspection, hibernation as sacred rest. Even the smallest creatures carried meaning. The spider, weaving her web each morning, reminded people that the world itself is an interlacing of lives. To harm one thread was to tremble the whole. Sometimes I think our modern hearts have forgotten that lesson. We speak of nature as something outside us, as scenery, not kinship. Yet when the wind howls, don't we still feel a shiver of recognition? When a bird tilts its head and meets our eyes, doesn't something ancient stir inside? These stories are not superstition, they're memory, the language of empathy. The old storytellers never claimed their tales were literal. They said, "This is how the truth looks when it puts on feathers." Truth, after all, is easier to hold when it arrives as a friend. And so they told us about coyote, raven, turtle, not to explain animals, but to explain us. The fire crackles again, pulling me back to the circle. I can almost hear laughter, the kind that comes after a good story, when everyone feels both wiser and more human. Someone tosses another stick onto the coals, and the flames rise, revealing smoke that curls like shapes of wings. If you were sitting here beside me, I'd ask you quietly, which spirit do you think walks beside you? Maybe you're Coyote, quick to act, forever curious, stumbling into brilliance. Maybe you're Raven, watchful and sharp, bringing light where none existed. Or maybe you're Turtle, calm amid the storm, patient enough to wait for the right tide. Whichever it is, know this, the spirits still walk. They live in every choice we make, every kindness or mischief, every quiet act of courage. They are the old companions who remind us that to be human is to be part of everything that breathes. Which spirit animal do you think walks beside you? The trickster, the protector, or the dreamer? Share it in the comments before the fire dies out. The night sky feels different when the moon is full. The air grows softer, the shadows gentler. You can almost sense an invisible tide rising through the land. Not of water, but of memory. The elders used to say that the moon listens more closely than the sun, because she was made to hear what others forget to say. Tonight, she looks down on us, round and patient, carrying the faces of all the women who once shaped the world through quiet strength. In the old stories, women were never merely witnesses. They were bridges between life and death, spirit and soil, the seen and unseen. To speak of creation was to speak of them. The first mothers were not metaphors. They were sacred truths made flesh. Their names still echo in the songs that rise with the dawn. Changing woman, corn mother, white shell woman, moon maiden, mother of waters. Each carries a different lesson, yet all teach the same. That compassion is power, and balance is the root of all survival. Let me begin with the Navajo story of Changing Woman, one of the most beloved among the Dine people. They say that she was born from the union of earth and sky, conceived from the meeting of morning dew and sunlight upon sacred ground. When she grew, she became the embodiment of life cycles: birth, growth, decay, renewal. Her home rested on the western horizon, where the sun completes its journey each day. In her youth, Changing Woman met the sun himself, who gave her twins, monster slayer and born for water, destined to rid the world of the great evils that tormented humanity. Through her children, she brought protection and balance to her people. Yet her true power was not in warfare, but in creation. She could transform seasons with her moods. When she laughed, flowers opened. When she rested, the earth cooled. As she aged, she walked to the eastern mountains and shed her old skin, emerging renewed, young again, radiant with morning light. This act of self-renewal became the rhythm of the earth's seasons, the turning of years, the promise that life would always return. The people saw in her not immortality, but resilience, the sacred art of becoming new without forgetting what came before. Sometimes I think of her when I see the first green after winter, that small defiance of a sprout breaking through cold soil. It's as if Changing Woman whispers, "Nothing truly ends, it only changes form." Far to the east, among the Cherokee, another woman holds the heart of all sustenance, Selu, the corn mother. Long ago, they say, there lived a woman who could feed her family no matter the season. Her husband and sons often wondered how she managed it. Each evening, she would enter a small lodge and emerge with baskets overflowing with corn and beans. One day, curiosity turned to suspicion. Her sons followed her and peered through a crack in the wall. To their shock, they saw her rubbing her belly and her sides, and from her body the grains fell like golden rain. ashamed and frightened by what they didn't understand. The sons believed their mother's power was unnatural. They killed her, thinking to preserve what was human in their world. But as she lay dying, Selu spoke softly to them. "Do not weep. Where my blood falls, corn will grow. Where my breath touches, beans will rise. Care for the fields as you would have cared for me." From her sacrifice came the first harvest. Each year, when the Cherokee plant corn, they remember her, the woman whose body became their sustenance. Her story is not about tragedy alone, but about reciprocity. That every gift demands respect, that nourishment is born from gratitude. Selu teaches us that love can take the shape of loss, that to give fully is to live forever in what you've nourished. I think of her every time I hold a grain of corn between my fingers. It feels like a heartbeat. Both Changing Woman and Selu speak of balance. Not the balance of perfection, but of acceptance. The moon waxes and wanes, the tide rises and falls, the body grows and rests. These cycles are not flaws in creation. They are its essence. In many nations across the continent, women were the keepers of law and lineage. Among the Iroquois, clan mothers chose the chiefs, guided councils, and preserved justice through calm wisdom. A chief who lost his balance, who acted with greed or cruelty, could be stripped of his title by the women who appointed him. They understood something the modern world often forgets. That power, untempered by empathy, becomes blindness. To the Lakota, the feminine principle was so sacred that it was embodied in ritual itself. The white buffalo calf woman, whom we met before, brought the people the sacred pipe, teaching that men and women must honor each other's roles as equal halves of creation. Without the feminine, ceremony lost its heart. Without the masculine, it lost its form. Harmony was the only true prayer. I often wonder when the balance began to tilt, when reverence for the life-giver became fear, when power was mistaken for dominance. Yet even through centuries of change, these stories survived. They were carried in lullabies, hidden in songs, whispered at night by mothers to daughters. The rhythm of the pestle grinding corn, the weaving of cloth, the braiding of hair, each small act became a continuation of those ancient truths. When I think of Changing Woman and Selu, I don't see distant goddesses. I see my grandmother's hands, scarred and steady as she taught me to sew. I see my mother standing at the window, watching the moon rise while stirring a pot of soup. I see every woman who has ever held something fragile, a child, a secret, a dream, and refused to let it die. In every culture, there are stories of heroes and battles, but it's the women's stories that teach endurance. Not the loud kind that shouts over the storm, but the quiet kind that holds a candle through it. Changing Woman didn't fight monsters with a sword. She created the seasons that tamed them. Selu didn't build temples. She became the earth that fed them. The moon climbs higher, casting her pale light across the sand. It looks like silver water flowing between the stones. Somewhere, far away, a coyote calls. Not mocking tonight, but mournful. The sound carries like a song for all the mothers who have ever given more than they had, for all the daughters who learned strength from softness. There is an old Navajo prayer that says, "In beauty, may I walk, with beauty behind me, before me, above me, all around me." When I hear those words, I think of the women in these stories, how they walked in beauty not by possessing it, but by embodying it. They understood that beauty was not appearance, but relationship, a harmony between what breathes and what gives breath. Maybe that's why the moon shines brighter than all the stars. She doesn't burn with her own fire. She reflects it. Her light is borrowed, yet it transforms the world. Just like the women who have guided us, reflecting, renewing, reminding. If you're listening before sleep, whisper a thank you to the mothers, daughters, and grandmothers who keep your story alive. Their spirit still listens. The wind changes in this part of the story. It still carries the scent of pine and smoke, still moves through the grass with a hush like breathing, but something within it has shifted. It no longer speaks only of the old ways. It carries another sound now, the creak of ships, the clang of metal, the strange cadence of tongues that once belonged to distant shores. The elders said they first saw them on the horizon, bright shapes against the sea like moving stars. At first, no one knew what to make of them. The tall sails like white wings, the hulls cutting through water as if alive. Some thought they were spirits, others thought they were messengers. Few imagined they would stay. When the strangers stepped onto the sand, the world held its breath. Their clothes gleamed like frost, their skin pale under the sun. They spoke in bursts of sound, sharp and unfamiliar. Hands reached out, hesitant. A gesture of peace, perhaps, or curiosity. For a moment, there was wonder. The stories say some of the first meetings were kind. Gifts exchanged, food shared, songs offered across the distance of language. But kindness can be fragile when fear stands behind it. Soon the balance began to tilt. The strangers brought not only metal and glass but hunger. For land, for gold, for power. The rivers, once free to wander, were marked on paper. The forests were cut and renamed. The songs that had lived in the air for centuries began to fade beneath the noise of axes and muskets. Still, the people tried to understand. The women listened to the strange prayers of the newcomers and heard familiar echoes. Talk of spirit, of creation, of forgiveness. Some believed peace could be kept through understanding. They offered corn and words. They taught how to plant, how to heal with herbs, how to read the sky for rain. But the learning did not flow both ways. There is a story, quiet and almost lost, about a woman from the coast who once carried a song that belonged to her grandmother. When her village was burned, she fled into the woods, her child wrapped to her chest. She hid in silence for days, until even the birds seemed afraid to sing. But on the fourth night, she hummed the melody again. Soft as a breath, softer than tears. She did not remember all the words, only their shape. That was enough. Her child, half asleep, heard and remembered. Years later, long after the mother was gone, that child taught the same melody to her own daughter. The song never died. It just learned to whisper. That is how so much survived, in whispers. In the lullabies sung to sleeping children, in the patterns woven into baskets and blankets, in the quiet teachings that never made it to paper. The women carried the stories in their bodies. The men guarded them in silence. When the languages were forbidden, people spoke them to the wind, to the fire, to the stars that would never tell. A missionary once wrote that he could hear strange harmonies coming from the fields at night. Low voices, mournful but beautiful, he said. He didn't know that those were prayers disguised as songs of labor. Every rhythm of the hoe and drumbeat of the heart became a secret act of resistance. Even when the children were taken to faraway schools, their hair cut short, their clothes changed, and their tongues punished, some part of them refused to forget. One boy carved words from home into the wooden bedpost by his window. Another whispered her mother's name every night before sleeping, so it would not vanish. They grew up learning to speak two languages, one taught by force, one carried by love. I often think about those children, how it must have felt to live between worlds, carrying the ache of both, to smile in the new tongue and cry in the old, to be told that the earth that had once been sacred was now property, that the spirits that once walked beside you were now myths. Yet somehow, they endured. They learned how to move unseen, how to weave fragments of their identity into the fabric of what was demanded of them. Like roots growing beneath frozen ground, they waited. The grief of that time is heavy, but not hopeless. Even in loss, there was astonishing grace. Some found ways to bridge the gap, to teach stories through craft, through symbols hidden in patterns. A simple spiral might mean life renewed. A diamond shape might recall the four directions. The language of art became a map home. In the winter, when night came early, the old people would gather what remained of their community and tell the children what they could. They would begin not with long ago, but with remember. Because remembrance was not a luxury. It was survival. I imagine one such night now. A small fire flickering against the dark, snow falling softly beyond the doorway. The storyteller's voice is thin with age but steady. The children listen, wide-eyed, each word a seed planted in their hearts. The story is not about loss, it's about endurance. It ends with a promise that what is forgotten can still be found, that a single word spoken with truth can heal generations of silence. Centuries later, when their descendants began to speak openly again, those old songs re-emerged like rivers breaking through ice. Languages once thought gone returned to mouths that had never forgotten their shape. Drums sounded once more under the open sky, and dancers moved with the memory of those who could not. That is the miracle of the human spirit, to be silenced and yet to keep singing, to be broken and yet still whole. When I walk through museums now, I sometimes pause before the displays of pottery or beadwork labeled anonymous. I wonder if the curators know that those hands were not anonymous at all. Each line, each bead, each curve was a message, a quiet declaration. I was here. I remember. I still belong. The wind outside grows stronger as I speak, carrying with it the faint smell of rain. It reminds me that even storms end in renewal. The earth has learned to heal from deeper wounds than these. Perhaps that is why these stories still reach us, because they are not only about suffering, but about returning to balance after it. If you've ever felt your voice silenced, this part of history belongs to you too. Leave a quiet word, just one, in memory of those who kept singing. Sometimes, after long silence, a single note can awaken the world. It begins softly, a hum, a heartbeat, a sound that trembles between grief and grace. That is how the dream songs were born, not as grand symphonies or hymns written on paper, but as breaths carried through generations, humming beneath sorrow, rising again when the world seemed ready to listen. The elders say the people never forgot how to sing. They only learned to sing differently. When words were forbidden, rhythm spoke. When rhythm was silenced, the body spoke through dance, through the steady beat of the drum that echoed the heart. The drum became more than an instrument. It was life itself, a reminder that as long as the heart still beat, the story was not over. After the long centuries of shadow, something began to stir. It wasn't loud, not a revolution, but a remembering. Across the plains, in mountain valleys, by river bends and desert mesas, old songs began to surface again. Sometimes it started with a grandmother's lullaby, the kind whispered to children to help them dream safely. Sometimes it was the steady chant of feet moving in the circle dances, each step a prayer. Sometimes it was a single word, spoken in a language that had nearly vanished but refused to die. I imagine being there, in that moment of return, standing at the edge of a small fire as the first drumbeat sounds. The night air hums, and voices rise one by one, uncertain at first, then stronger, weaving together. It's not performance. It's healing. The people are not just singing, they're remembering who they are. Among the Lakota, they say the drumbeat is the sound of Mother Earth's heart. Each pulse connects us back to her. To dance around the drum is to move in harmony with creation, a living circle that reminds us that we all belong. I can almost feel that rhythm now, low, steady, like the breath of the ground itself. Somewhere in that circle, dream catchers sway gently in the breeze. You've probably seen them, hoops woven with threads, decorated with feathers and beads. They began with the Ojibwe people, who told that the spider woman, known as a Sibikashi, watched over the children. She wove her web each night to catch the darkness and keep the nightmares away. But as the tribes spread far across the land, she could no longer watch all at once. So mothers and grandmothers began to weave the webs themselves, teaching that only good dreams would pass through the hole in the center, while the bad would be caught and dissolved by morning light. It is said that every dream catcher holds a prayer, not only for peace at night, but for protection of the soul. Even now, when I see one hanging by a window, I think of those first weavers, their fingers moving patiently under the moonlight, tying knots not just of string, but of memory. They believed, as many still do, that dreams are messages, gifts from ancestors, meant to guide and comfort. The dream songs, too, are like that. They are not meant to be analyzed. They are meant to be felt. They speak in tones that the rational mind cannot grasp, the deep, vibrating chant that seems to rise from the earth itself. Some of the old songs have no words at all, just syllables shaped by breath. The elders say those sounds are older than language, the voice of creation itself. Over time, these songs became medicine. In ceremonies of healing, the people would gather in circles, their faces illuminated by the fire's glow. Each singer would take a turn, calling out to the spirits of their ancestors. The sound would build, overlapping voices, like waves rolling onto shore. Some sang to remember, others sang to release pain. Some simply closed their eyes and let the vibrations wash through them until tears came. Not from sadness, but from the relief of feeling alive again. When I listen to recordings of those songs today, I can feel that same pull, the ache of history and the beauty of endurance intertwined. There is no bitterness in the voices, only strength. It's as if they are saying, we are still here. The world tried to silence us, but it could not silence the wind. The revival of language came alongside the revival of song. Communities began to teach the old words again. First in whispers, then in classrooms, and finally in celebrations. Elders who had been punished for speaking their tongue now stood proudly before children who repeated those same words without fear. It must have felt like sunrise breaking after a long night. And it wasn't only about the words themselves, but what they carried, ways of seeing the world that modern language could not hold. In many native languages, there is no word for thing as separate from life. Rocks, trees, water, all are alive. To speak those languages again was to restore the sacred relationships that had been fractured. Sometimes healing happens quietly, almost imperceptibly. A dancer lifts their feet in rhythm to a song older than their name. A mother braids her daughter's hair while humming the melody her grandmother once sang in secret. A boy learns the story of the great turtle not from a book, but from the voice of his uncle around a fire. Each act, small on its own, becomes part of the larger restoration, like threads weaving back into a whole. Modern life may have changed the tools, but not the spirit. Powwows still gather dancers from hundreds of nations, each wearing colors that carry meaning. Red for courage, yellow for dawn, blue for sky, white for spirit. The air fills with drumbeats and ululations, not as reenactment, but as continuation. The songs are not museum pieces. They are living. They adapt, they breathe, they evolve. And yet, beneath every new rhythm, the old one beats, the same pulse that once guided hunters, mothers, dreamers. The same pulse that echoed through silence when the people were forbidden to speak. It is the sound of continuity, of survival, of love that refuses to vanish. What moves me most about these dream songs is how generous they are. They do not demand that you belong to a certain tribe or bloodline. They invite you to listen, to feel, to remember what it means to be human, connected, humble, and aware that every life depends on every other. In that way, the healing they offer extends far beyond one people. It is the world's healing, too. When I close my eyes, I imagine standing among them. The dancers, the drummers, the elders, the children. The stars above, the fire below. The night full of sound and spirit. It's easy to forget, in the noise of modern life, that silence itself can sing. But here, in the rhythm of the drum and the breath of the wind, you can hear it again. The steady voice of endurance, whispering, keep going. You are not alone. If this part gives you hope, take a deep breath, you're sharing in their dream. Let someone else hear this story too, and pass the light forward. The world looks different now. Cities glow where forests once stood. Highways thread across plains where buffalo used to roam. And satellites move through the same skies that once guided our ancestors. Yet even beneath all this noise and light, something ancient still stirs. The fires that were once lit in clay hearths and stone circles have not gone out. They've only changed shape, flickering now in classrooms, community centers, and digital screens, where new voices speak the old truths in new ways. I've met some of those voices, not in person perhaps, but through their stories. They come from many nations, many languages, but their message carries the same heartbeat. They say, we are still here. Our songs still rise. Our stories still breathe. Take, for instance, a poet from the Dine Nation who writes about the desert wind that raised her. She speaks of asphalt roads that cut through sacred ground, but also of wild sage that still grows defiantly at the edges. Her words weave past and present together. The grandmother's voice beside the hum of a freeway, the ancient prayer carried through a laptop screen. She says that the act of writing in her language is itself a ceremony, a reclamation of rhythm. Then there is the artist from the Pacific Northwest who paints salmon not just as fish, but as ancestors, their scales patterned with stories, their eyes reflecting the rivers they can no longer reach. His work hangs in museums now, but he says it doesn't belong to walls. Each brushstroke, he explains, is a promise to return what was taken, not the past, but the respect. And somewhere in the plains, a young woman stands before a crowd, her regalia glinting in the sun. The drum begins and she dances, not for spectacle, but for survival. Each step is an echo of her great-grandmother, who danced in secret when it was forbidden. The rhythm moves through her feet into the earth, into the bones of the people watching. You can see the fire in her eyes, not anger, but purpose. These are the fires that still burn. They are not flames of nostalgia, but of continuity. The people do not long for a lost world. They tend the one that still lives within this one. There are also those who carry the old teachings into the work of healing the land itself. Along the coasts, tribal environmental stewards restore eelgrass beds and salmon runs, guided by the same understanding their ancestors held, that care for the earth is care for the self. In the Great Lakes region, elders teach youth to harvest wild rice respectfully, thanking the water spirits before each gathering. Out west, firekeepers use controlled burns to heal forests, just as their ancestors did for thousands of years. Science has finally begun to call these practices innovation, but the people have always known them simply as balance. One elder once said, "We don't manage nature, we participate in it." That sentence lingers in me like a song. It's easy to forget in modern life, surrounded by machines and walls, that every breath we take is shared with the trees. Every sip of water has passed through countless lives before ours. These stories remind us that stewardship is not an act of ownership, but of belonging. And belonging, that's what these modern voices speak of most. In a world that often confuses connection with consumption, they remind us that true connection asks for care, not taking. A Cherokee musician once described his work not as revival, but as remembrance. "Our language is not dying," he said. "It's sleeping, and every time we speak it, it wakes up a little more." His songs mix traditional flute with electric guitar, two worlds intertwined. You can hear the hum of centuries between each note. It's not about choosing the old or the new. It's about weaving them together so neither is lost. Even digital storytellers, those who post their teachings online, share recipes, or record elders telling old tales, are keepers of the sacred circle now. Their fires burn in the blue glow of screens, connecting villages separated by oceans. The stories travel farther than they ever could before, yet the intent remains the same: to remember, to honor, to invite listening. Sometimes I think about how those ancestors would see this, all our technology, our voices carried invisibly through air and light. Maybe they'd be amazed. Maybe they'd smile knowingly, because after all, they too believed in invisible threads connecting us. They called them spirits, we call them signals, but both, in their own ways, bind us. The continuity isn't always easy. Some stories are heavy to carry, stories of displacement, of loss, of identity reshaped by survival. But the people who tell them don't seek pity. They seek acknowledgement, that healing begins when the truth is spoken, even softly. Listening, after all, is an act of respect. And there is joy, too bright, abundant joy. The laughter of children learning old words for the first time. The smell of fry bread and cedar smoke at community gatherings. The sound of drums echoing across open fields. Each of these moments is a spark, keeping the night warm against forgetting. In recent years, young native filmmakers, writers, and educators have carried these flames further, turning classrooms, podcasts, and even comic books into circles of teaching. They show that tradition is not fragile. It evolves. The stories of Raven, Coyote, and Turtle live on in new forms, their lessons reframed for a generation that still wrestles with pride, cleverness, and patience. The spirit of the old tricksters now moves through film, art, and humor, reminding the world that resilience can laugh as well as weep. If you pause to listen, you'll find those same lessons whispering through your own life, too. The call to slow down, to notice the small miracles. A bird's flight, a tree's persistence, the warmth of another's hand. These are not distant cultural relics. They are invitations to remember our shared humanity. The world may look modern, but the roots beneath it are ancient, still feeding us if we care to listen. I sometimes think of the phrase walking in beauty, which comes from the Navajo teaching that beauty is not something seen, but something practiced, a way of moving through the world with harmony. To walk in beauty today might mean listening with empathy, living gently, choosing gratitude. It might mean honoring the fire that burns within you, the one that wants to make, to mend, to remember. Because the truth is, these legends never ended. They became us. Every act of kindness, every effort to protect what lives, every time we speak softly to the earth or to each other, those are the stories continuing. Tonight, as you rest, remember, you're part of a story still unfolding. If these legends moved you, subscribe or follow so we can walk through history again. Together. The night feels vast again. The stories have all been told. The fire has grown low, and the world has returned to that soft, breathing stillness that always follows truth. I sit here, beneath the same sky we began under, and I can feel how full it is now. Not with noise, but with echoes. The voices of all who have spoken tonight. The sky woman, the trickster, the corn mother, the dream singers, seem to move through the air like a faint hum of wind. They are not gone. They are simply resting, as all things must. When we began this journey, perhaps you came only to listen, to drift into calm. But now, I think, something in you has remembered not facts or timelines, but a rhythm. A rhythm older than memory, older than writing. The rhythm of belonging. It's easy, in our world of constant movement, to forget the language of stillness. We rush from one light to another, measuring our worth by what we finish, not what we feel. Yet here, in the quiet between words, something sacred returns. The ancestors called it balance. The earth calls it rest. The heart calls it home. I think about what these stories have shown us. How Sky Woman fell not as punishment, but as invitation to create with care. How Coyote, for all his mischief, reminded us to laugh at our own pride. How Changing Woman became young again not by defying time, but by embracing it. How Selu, the corn mother, turned her body into nourishment, teaching that love's greatest power is in giving. And how, through centuries of silence, the people kept singing. All of them, in their own ways, taught the same lesson, that the world is alive and we are part of its breathing. If you sit quietly enough, you can feel it. The slow pulse beneath your feet, that's the heart of the earth, steady and forgiving. The whisper in the leaves, the curve of the moon's light across your skin, that's the world speaking back. The stories remind us not to look above for divinity, but around. Everything you touch is sacred if you touch it with awareness. Sometimes I wonder how much calmer life would be if we lived by those old rhythms again. Rising with the sun, resting with the stars, speaking less, listening more. Watching the world not as something to control, but as something to converse with. The rivers have always had their own wisdom. The stones have their patience. The wind its humor. We just stopped hearing them when we stopped believing they had something to say. Once an elder told me, to pray is to listen. Took me years to understand what he meant. I used to think prayer was asking or thanking or hoping. But he was right, prayer is listening. To the breath, to the body, to the silence that holds every sound. That's what the old songs taught too. That healing begins not when we speak, but when we hear. When I look at the stars now, I no longer see them as distant suns. I see them as stories still unfolding, each one a flicker of someone's remembered dream. They shine not to remind us of how small we are, but how connected. The same light that falls on a canyon in Arizona falls on a city street, a farmhouse, a child's pillow. No matter where we stand beneath the same story. Maybe that's the greatest lesson of all, that everything circles back. Life, death, memory, renewal, none are separate. They move like seasons, like song refrains. The same melody returns, sometimes in different keys, but always familiar. When the first people told stories, they weren't only teaching children or explaining creation. They were setting the rhythm for how to live with respect for the unseen, with gratitude for the ordinary, with trust in the turning of things. They understood that to walk well upon the earth was the first and greatest act of wisdom. We may not live in their villages anymore, but the same truth still fits our time. Balance is still needed. Kindness still saves. Listening still heals. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine what it would be like if the world suddenly went quiet. No engines, no voices, no hum of electricity. Just the sound of wind and water, birds and breathing. Would we feel lonely? Or would we finally feel accompanied again? Perhaps that's what the ancestors wanted most for us. Not reverence in temples, but awareness in every step. They didn't separate spirit from soil. They saw them as the same. That's why they gave thanks before cutting a tree, why they sang before hunting, why they told stories before sleeping, because everything alive deserved acknowledgement. If we could live like that again, even in small ways, the world might soften. Imagine if every meal began with gratitude for the soil that grew it. If every breath felt like a gift from trees. If every stranger we met was seen as a fellow traveler rather than an interruption. The legends are not ancient rules. They are gentle reminders. Be humble, be grateful, be awake. And yet, awakening doesn't mean grand revelations. Sometimes it's as simple as noticing the warmth of sunlight on your hand, or the smell of rain before it falls. It's knowing that even in pain, the world keeps offering beauty. It's trusting that the same wind that carried Sky Woman still carries your story too. Tonight, as you listen to the last of the fire's crackles, let yourself rest in that thought, that you are not apart from this world, but a note within its song. You belong to the rhythm of rivers, to the patience of trees, to the memory of starlight. You are the continuation of everything that came before. So breathe deeply. Let the stories settle in your heart like stones at the bottom of a river. Smooth, quiet, eternal. When morning comes, carry them with you, not as burdens but as companions. Let them remind you that gentleness is strength, that kindness is wisdom, that the world still listens when you speak softly to it. Before the story ends, tell me, what lesson will you carry into tomorrow? Leave it softly like a prayer. The fire is nearly gone now. Only a few red coals remain, pulsing softly like the heartbeat of something sleeping. The night has folded itself around us again, the kind of deep, velvety darkness that feels alive. Above, the stars return to their quiet watch, patient as ever. The wind has grown cooler, brushing softly against the skin, carrying with it the faint scent of ash, sage, and memory. It is in this hush, when words slow and hearts listen, that stories settle. They no longer rush to be told. They simply breathe. I want to thank you for sitting here with me, for listening, for imagining, for remembering. Because listening, though it seems simple, is one of the oldest forms of honor. Every time someone listens with an open heart, an old fire flares back to life somewhere. In a canyon, a forest, a grandmother's voice, a forgotten melody. You have helped that happen tonight. When the first storytellers spoke beside fires like this, they knew the words themselves were fragile. They would vanish into air as soon as they were said. But what they believed, what they trusted, was that the listener would carry the story forward. Not word for word, but heart for heart. And so, through generations, the stories never truly ended. They became breath passing through time, finding new voices to rest in. You have become one of those voices now. Somewhere inside you, the stories of Sky Woman, of the Coyote, of Changing Woman and Selu, of the dream singers and the quiet survivors, are still glowing like embers. You might not recall every detail, every name, but that's all right. Stories are not meant to be memorized. They are meant to be felt. They live in gestures, in how you look at a tree, how you pause before stepping on an ant, how you remember to whisper thanks to the sky after rain. The strange, isn't it, how something as intangible as a story can feel heavier than stone, and yet lighter than smoke. Perhaps that's why the ancients compared stories to wind, invisible but able to shape the world. I sometimes wonder what the first storyteller must have felt, that moment when they realized words could hold meaning beyond the self. Maybe they were sitting much like we are now, tracing patterns in the dust, looking up at the same sky. Maybe they whispered to the stars not to be alone. And the stars, in their silent brilliance, answered not with sound but with presence. That was enough. Storytelling, at its heart, has always been a conversation between past and present, human and earth, dream and waking. It doesn't demand understanding, only attention. When we listen, truly listen, the boundary between us and the world softens. The voices of stone and water and wind begin to make sense again. Tonight, as the last sparks fade, I think of how the elders used to end their tales. They never said the end. They would smile, stir the fire, and say something like, "Now the story belongs to you." That was their way of blessing it, of reminding every listener that the tale continues not in the words, but in the life that follows. And so I say the same to you now, wherever you are, whether in a quiet room, a sleepless city, a countryside wrapped in crickets. This story belongs to you. You've walked with ancestors and spirits, with animals who speak and rivers that remember. You've seen creation born and reborn. You've witnessed how songs outlive silence, how compassion outlives conquest, how the smallest acts, a lullaby, a whispered word, a hand resting gently on the earth, can hold the weight of eternity. If you carry anything from this night, let it be this: the world still listens. Even when it seems indifferent, even when it seems too loud or too fast, the world hears the smallest kindness. The wind remembers your breath. The ground remembers your steps. The stars remember your gaze. Nothing given in love disappears. The elders used to say that every person leaves two trails, one on the earth, one in the air. The trail on the earth fades with time, but the trail in the air, made of words, laughter, and memory, drifts forever. Each story, each kindness, becomes part of that invisible sky road. And someday, when someone else sits beneath these same stars and listens, they will breathe in a little of what you leave behind. Isn't that a comforting thought? That our stories never really end, they just change carriers. If you could look down from the stars right now, you'd see countless small fires still burning across the land. Campfires, hearths, candles in windows, the warm glow of screens where someone else is listening to a story like this one. Each flame different, yet connected. Each listener, a new link in the chain of remembering. There's a word in many native languages that doesn't quite translate into English. A word that means something like, all my relations. It isn't limited to family. It includes everything. People, trees, clouds, stones, animals, water, stars. It's a way of saying, I am because we are. That, I think, is the truest closing of any story, to remember that none of us stand alone. Every voice, every life, every leaf and feather is part of one continuous story being told by the universe itself. So, as this night deepens, I offer you a small blessing, one that has no religion, only reverence. May you walk gently, knowing the ground beneath you is alive. May you speak softly, so the wind carries only kindness in your name. May you rest deeply, knowing the stars above have watched over every generation before you. And may you rise each morning with the courage to begin again, as Sky Woman did, as the corn did, as every song has since time began. The fire sighs. One coal breaks apart with a faint crackle. The warmth still lingers, but the flames are done. What remains now is memory. Soft, glowing, endless. I look up once more. The stars seem closer tonight, as if they, too, have drawn nearer to listen. The moon leans quietly against the horizon. Everything feels wrapped in gratitude. Not the loud, exuberant kind, but the slow gratitude that lives in the bones. The world is full of endings, but not this one. This one is just a pause, a breath before the next story begins somewhere else, in another heart, another time. So, traveler, before we part, close your eyes. Let the silence settle over you like a blanket woven from all the voices we've shared. Feel the pulse of the earth beneath you, the air around you, the stars above you. You are exactly where you belong, within the story that never ends. If this story brought you calm or reflection, share it so others may rest beneath these same stars. Good night, traveler, the earth remembers you.